Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing the Spellbinders Copperplate Holiday Sentiments collection. These are some absolutely gorgeous foiling plates with some very beautiful and scripty holiday sentiments. And I'm also sharing some treasured cardstock packages. Now these packages of cardstock have 15 different sheets per package in 5 different metallic finishes. So there's 3 sheets per metallic finish, and they come in silver, rose gold, as well as gold. So I absolutely love specialty papers, especially for holiday cards. So this is perfect for the holiday season coming up, and I love that rose gold is included. It's not a metallic that I use very often, but I really love it. I'm not a gold fan because yellow is one of my least favorite colors, but I love rose gold because it's got a bit of more of a pinky tone. So I'm going to do some foiling with the Copperplate Holiday Sentiments, and I'm doing it in matte silver, matte gold, as well as rose gold. So I have my glimmer machine out here warming up. The first one I'm going to do is going to be in the silver. This is the matte silver. So if you're new to foiling, you plug your machine in, turn it on, and there's that red button at the top when it's on. When the platform is ready, that middle button turns green, and that bottom button is a timer, or bottom light is a timer button. So once you've put your stacking on there, you press that timer button and it flashes, and once it goes solid, then it's ready to put through your die cutting machine. You need the glimmer machine for the heat and the die cutting machine for the pressure. And the stacking is your glimmer plate, or in this case the copper plate, with the scripty side or the image side up, your foil with the pretty side down, and then your cardstock on top. And I'm using hammer mill cardstock for all my foiling, but I change my mind and add something towards the end of the video, and you'll see that then. And then add the plates for the glimmer machine. Once again, once the timer button goes solid, you put it through your die cutting machine, and that applies the pressure to apply that foil to your cardstock. I usually let it or take it off and leave it for just a couple seconds, really not very long, before peeling it off. And you can see how gorgeous these are at foiling. Now that Warm Wishes one that I did at the very beginning, I realized after I had finished it that I didn't have as much room as I wanted on that cardstock to do what I wanted to do with it. So I did another one. That's why you're seeing another one in the middle there. I absolutely love the look of these sentiments, and you can take these sentiments and make a very, very simple but elegant card with them. I'm going to step them up a little bit for this video, but just know that you don't have to get as complicated as some of these cards might be. If you want to keep it nice and simple, you absolutely can do that, and you would still have a stunning card. I think any one of these sentiments in the middle of a white piece of cardstock or a colored piece of cardstock, and that's where I changed my mind towards the end. I'll do a colored piece later in this video, and then have a matte with one of the metallics behind it. I think it would be an absolutely stunning, simple, elegant card. So while I'm doing my foiling, I also like to do the solid foiling. I think I'm not going to use them in this video. I might use a couple, but I find that it's much easier to store a piece of cardstock that's foiled with the negative foiling than to store all of those foil remnants for doing the solid foiling later. So we might as well not waste it. Some of these, when I go to use them, I use them for mats around other images, and some of them I end up die cutting and use it kind of like a specialty cardstock. So I've got all of my foiling done. I did most of it off screen because once you've seen the process, repetition, you don't need to see the whole thing over and over and over again. So I'm going to start with the Warm Wishes foiled pieces. I also did some snowflakes at the same time, and I want to use these as embellishments, but I do want to have a little bit of color behind them. So I'm taking a tumbled glass distress pad and I'm doing some light ink blending around it before I use the coordinating die and die cut them out. Now, anytime I'm using a coordinating die with either a stamped or a foiled sentiment, I like to tape it in place just to make sure that that die is going to be perfectly placed and not move while I'm running it through my machine. I've had far too many instances where a die has moved while I'm running it through the machine. So by putting that die on there and taping it in place, I can make sure that it's not going to do that. And that tape I'll reuse several times. and get as much use out of it as possible before tossing it out. So it's, by the time it gets tossed out, it's been very well used. Now, the one thing I forgot to mention is before I was doing this inking and die cutting, I did take a piece of white cardstock and I embossed it with the Glimmering Snowflakes embossing folder. Whenever I'm using a 3D embossing folder, I like to mist my cardstock lightly on both sides before putting it in the embossing folder and running it through the machine. So I just have that towards the side drying while I'm waiting, or while I'm doing this die cutting and doing the rest of my card prep. So I used that treasured silver cardstock and I chose the brushed one. I love that the front of the package has samples of each one of those cardstocks and you can see exactly what finishes are in there. I found that it was really easy to put it against my cardstock with my foiled sentiment in order to choose which one I wanted. It makes it very easy to know exactly what you're getting and how they're going to work together. Now, one of the ways that I love to extend the life of my specialty cardstocks is I will use them as a mat around my larger image. And then if I have a smaller image or smaller die cuts, I will cut out of that center and use that. So you can see that silver piece there. I had it cut down to 4 1/8 inch by 5 3/8 inch. That centerpiece, I cut out the fresh picked labels and tags die cut. It's going to go behind my sentiment on the front of the card, but because that whole piece is going to be covered with this embossed snowflakes piece, you're never going to know that that was cut out. And if you've ever seen any of my videos before, you'll know that I do this regularly. If something is going to be covered, especially if it's a specialty cardstock or say a colored cardstock that I'm running low on, I will just cut it out of my mat and get double duty out of it. Again, no one knows it until you tell them. And anytime you can get as much as possible out of some of your supplies, it's absolutely worth it. So you'll see me doing that a few times on the cards that I'm creating in this video. So I wanted to ink blend my background here. So I started with Tumbled Glass, then I went to Salty Ocean, and now I have Uncharted Mariner. Once that brush was pretty dry, I extended some of my ink blending on the back. I decided I wanted it to go a little bit higher than I had it. Cleaned up my surface, and now I've got all my parts ready to assemble my card. So I'm working on a regular A2 card here. Like I said before, my mat is cut at 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and my embossed snowflake piece is cut to 4 inches by 5 1/4. Then I can put my Warm Wishes piece that has already got the mat behind it, and then I can add my snowflakes. I like to put an acrylic block onto my pieces while they're drying just to hold everything nice and flat, frees up my hand for creating or working on my next step. And if I have to lay things out, I'll often put them right on the acrylic block so I can see exactly how they're going to look with my background before I glue them on. It's always nice to be able to see exactly what it's going to look like. Then I can lift my block off, move it to the side, and I know exactly where I had everything placed. I am assembling everything with Barely Art glue. It's one of my favorite glues to use because it's a nice liquid glue that's fairly loose or fairly runny, but it starts to grab that cardstock really quickly. I have a fine tip bottle so I can use it for some of the smaller die cuts as well as assembling the pieces on my card. And it's the smaller bottle I find is much more convenient than having a large bottle of glue. Now, once we have all our pieces ready, the card assembly itself comes together really, really quickly. Now, I added that embossed snowflakes in the background because I thought it would look nice, but you could see how it would also look nice just with that Warm Wishes with the mat and then a few snowflake embellishments. For a final touch, I'm using some denim colored essential gems. This is a nice dark blue, so it's going to match my background here. I find the easiest way to put these down is to take a die pick, or even you could even take the end of a tweezers, poke it into the adhesive underneath, and then place it where you want and use your other finger to push it down. So I started with putting them on the snowflake embellishments, and then I ended up scattering a few on the background. Then I changed my mind and ended up putting them in the center of the snowflakes on the background. I thought that looked really nice. So you'll see me put them down here and then I'm going to move them. When I first put them down, I didn't press really, really hard. So it was easy to pick them up and to move them. And then when I move them, I press a little bit harder just to make sure that they're firmly in place there. So I just took the smallest of the gems from this package for the center of those snowflakes. There are 4 different sizes in this package, so it's nice to have the choice between those different sizes. And I always love things like this where they have the adhesive already on them. It makes it very convenient to use. Now I'm using the denim gems here because it matches the color scheme of the background as well as my snowflakes, but you could also use just some clear or transparent gems, or there's even some white gems that would also look fantastic if you wanted something just a little bit more subtle and not quite as dark. So for my second card, I'm using the Joy to the World copper plate, and I've got it foiled in rose gold foil. For my background there, I used the Glimmer Holly background foil plate, and I'm also going to be using the coordinating layering stencil to color in some of the areas for that background. Now I've got my rose gold Treasured Cardstock pack here, and I chose the pearl one because I've got a lot of foiling on this particular one. I didn't want anything too dark. I liked the lighter color with this, and I thought it would be just a nice complement to it, but I didn't want to take anything away from the foiling that I already had on there. So the first piece that I cut was 5 3/8 inch by 4 1/8 inch. I've got my foiled background cut down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And then I've got my Joy to the World strip there cut down to 3 inches wide. And the mat that I'm going to put behind there, I did at 3/8 of an inch. So the mats around the background as well as the mat on the edges of my Joy to the World piece are the same. So now I'm going to do my stenciling for my background. I'm using the coordinating layering stencil, like I said. I'm also using the Altenew Ultra Sticky Mat. This is perfect for holding down the stencils while I'm doing the foiling, and that way I don't have to tape anything down. I've got my background on there. The first color that I used was Saltwater Taffy. Now I've got the second layer on there, and I'm going to use some Bundled Sage. I'm going to be a little bit lighter handed with this. I am going to be a bit heavier towards the base of the leaves just to get a little bit of natural visual dimension to it. I want the foiling and the sentiment on this card to stay the focus, so I'm not using very many colors to do my stenciling. Actually, I'm only using 3 colors. I've got the Saltwater Taffy that I did for the berries, and I'm using Bundled Sage and Peeled Paint for my greenery. By not having too many colors here, I can make sure to keep that focus on the foiling, on the sentiment on the front. The other thing too is because I have my sentiment on a strip that's going to go across the card, that's going to cut down on this background so it doesn't get too busy and too overwhelming. So that was the third stencil there. I used the peeled paint, and now I'm doing the fourth stencil, and I'm doing that peeled paint again. For the third one, I was a little bit heavier handed. For this one, I'm going to be a little bit lighter handed, but just the same as I did the second one, I'm going to be a little bit heavier towards the center or the base of the holly leaves here. These are going behind the berries, so there would be a natural shadow there anyways, but it'll give the look of more colors in the same color family than there actually is. Now to add a little bit of a different texture to it, I'm just putting some glossy accents on those berries. I left my cardstock on the sticky mat to do this. When I peel things off the sticky mat, I find that my cardstock curves a little bit. So rather than fighting that and possibly having my glossy accents run, I decided to leave it on the mat, put the glossy accents on there, let it completely dry, and then peel it off. And this is just going to give, like I said, some visual dimensions, a little bit of extra texture to it. It's not going to add any color or anything, so it's not going to take anything away. It's just going to enhance the look. So once that's dry completely, we can peel that off, and you can see that it just gives a little bit of extra shine to that image piece there. You get some shine from the foiling, but it also gives just a different type of shine for that background. Now I can start working on assembling my card. Now I put glue on the back of this, hadn't intended to, so I'm going to glue this right onto the mat. Typically I'll put the mat down first and then put my image piece over top of it. But I had that one in my hand and just started putting the glue on it. Now I can put my acrylic block on there to hold that down, and while I'm waiting for that glue to start grabbing, I can put my sentiment on the strip there. Now my white piece with the sentiment is longer than the pearl copper piece or pearl rose gold piece that I have on the back there. So I am trying to center that so that it is centered in that sentiment. Now I had a tiny little bit of overfoiling, so I took my yellow tape and I pressed it on there to remove that. It was a little bit too sticky and I pressed a little bit too hard, so I removed a little bit of the foil. So this is the perfect opportunity to change the design up a little bit. I hadn't intended to do this, but because I did this and I wanted to hide that, and it's really not as visible on camera as it is in person. You can see it a little bit more in person. I'm going to add some die cuts to it. So I'm going to use the Christmas Blooms die, specifically that poinsettia die, as well as one of the leafy dies. And then I'm also going to use the Parcel and Post die. This one here, I like the holly on it. There is a holly die with the Christmas Blooms die, but for what I was wanting, it's a little bit too small. So I die cut them out of some cardstock scraps, and I'm just going to take that same ink that I used to ink blend with the stencils on the background and just add a tiny little bit to the base of the die. This is going to just, again, give it a little bit of visual dimension. So those holly leaves, I just used the bundled sage. For the other leaves, I used the peeled paint, just so they were a little bit different from each other. But again, it's just going to add a little bit of shadow. These are details that you don't necessarily really notice, but it does enhance the die cuts. So now that I have those done and my layers are all dried up on my card base, I can cut off the excess from that sentiment and I can start putting my little die cuts over the area where I removed too much of the foil. So what I like to do when I'm using floral and greenery die cuts is I like to use my fingers to add a little bit of shaping. So I will hold down the center of the flower and I will just kind of curve the petals with my fingers just to give them some extra dimension. You can use some styluses and embossing tools to do this as well, but I find for things like this, it's quite often really easy to just do it with your fingers. It doesn't require any tools and it takes seconds. So I'm going to add the leafy greens there first. You just use the glue on the center stem of those greens, and then for my holly, I kind of turn them into an S curve. I only put the glue on the bottom piece there. And again, it just gives it some extra dimension that I think just livens it a little bit. Finally, I'm going to add my poinsettia to the center of that arrangement. This poinsettia has two layers. There's a larger one and a smaller one. Obviously, I put the larger one down first and then the smaller one. And then because of that shaping with my fingers, that centerpiece often wants to pop up. So I just take my die pick and hold it for, I want to say maybe 10 seconds to just hold that in place. Finally, I finished off the center with some copper stickles. You could also use iridescent stickles or even just one of the gems that I used for the first card in an appropriate color. That would work great as well. For my card 3 here, I'm using the Happy Holidays Copperplate. I'm still using the rose gold because this one was foiled in rose gold as well. So I've got my mat cut there at 4 1/8 inch by 5 3/8 inch, and the finish I chose for that mat is the matte rose gold cardstock. Off screen, I chose which mirrored arch labels die I wanted to use for my sentiment as well as that mat, and I cut that mat out of the center of my larger mat for my card as well as my sentiment. Then I have this evergreen 3D embossing folder that I took some white cardstock, misted with water, and put it through the embossing folder and let it sit aside to dry. So I wanted to do some more florals on this card, so I chose the glitter cardstock as well as the mirror and also the mat that I'm using for this mat here as well as my sentiment mat. So I die cut those off screen. Now the mirrored arch labels die mat that I put for behind my sentiment, I'm going to cut the poinsettias out of the center of them because my sentiment is going to be covering it again. You're not going to see it, so I might as well get use out of that cardstock. Now, if I hadn't done that, I probably would have used about a half a sheet of this cardstock. By doing that, I only used a quarter sheet of this cardstock. So you can see how we can really extend how much we get use out of it. I only cut those 2 poinsettias out of there. If there was something else that I wanted die cut out of there for another project or whatnot, I could have done that. Again, no one would have noticed. Now, I wanted to show you how easy this cardstock die cuts, or how easy it is to get the die cuts out of there. And I thought I would do that with this pine branch here. One of the ways that I like to take them out, especially if it seems like it's stuck, is just to wiggle it in my fingers. Now you do want to look at the back side, make sure it's completely cut all the way through first, and then as long as you know that it's completely all the way cut through, you take it with your fingers and just gently wiggle it, and it wiggles that die cut out, and you could see the finished die cut absolutely beautifully. So all of this cardstock die cuts, even with the most intricate die cuts, and I absolutely love when you can take these specialty cardstocks and create some intricate die cuts for your creations. So often the pre-packaged embellishments that you can get doesn't have as much detail as you can get with die cuts, as well as the fact that you can't customize them. By being able to die cut this cardstock, you can get something really special and you can customize it. So I have, like I said before, the 3 different finishes from this pack are the glitter, mirror, and then the matte. And I love using the different finishes all together. It just gives you so much texture to this. I'm just doing an arrangement for this one on the top of the Happy Holidays. You could do it on the side, you could do it on the bottom coming up the side. You can really get creative with where you have the florals going. I chose to just do this on the top. And I'm making sure when I'm putting my die cuts down to not be covering the letters of the words. I am covering some of the little flourishes, but I'm not covering the letters. You can also see when I'm putting my glue on, I'm only putting glue down the center spine of these pieces. I don't worry about getting it on every single piece on this backing here. I like when some of those little bits flip up a little bit, adding that extra texture, and I've never found it to be a huge issue. Because we have the holly going on here, the bow, as well as the poinsettias, there's so much texture on top of that as well that I like having that on there. Once again, with my holly, I did kind of a little S curve with the holly itself. I only put glue on the base part that's going to be touching the card. You could also put a dot of it on the top part of that holly if you wanted to secure that down as well. It's really personal preference. I also put a little bit of curving in my bow here, and you can see how easy it is to get those curves in these specialty papers. By using this liquid glue, I can make sure to glue things down. I can move it if I need to. You'll notice as I'm putting this down that my glue hasn't set yet, so some of those die cuts are moving, but once it's set, they're not going to move at all. Again, when I put that center, the smallest poinsettia down, I do take my die pick and I hold it in place just to make sure that it's going to be nice and secure. And I do it again for about 10 seconds till that center is secure and is not bumping up. I have the Crystal Mix gems here, and I'm just taking the white one and I'm going to put that on the center of the flowers. So this is the pack here that I said at the beginning with the snowflakes, that you could use that for the centers as well. That would be absolutely gorgeous as well. I chose to use the denim ones just for something a little bit different. For this one here, this is the 4th card. I'm using the Merry Christmas Copperplate. Now, I was going to keep all of my mats the same for all of the cards here just to make it simple. However, because I have a little bit of overfoiling on the outside of my white piece of that Merry Christmas there, I chose to do my mats a little bit different. So this one is foiled in gold, so I'm using the gold cardstock, and I'm using the brushed gold cardstock of this one. I'm cutting that mat down to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and then I'm cutting my red piece down to 4 inches by 5 1/4. For my foiled piece here, I'm cutting this one down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. I'm trying to cut as little as possible from the left side and the top because I have another element that I want to put on there, and I want to try to leave as much room as possible. But this was necessary for getting that overfoiling off. You can use a sand eraser to get some overfoiling off, but there is too much there. I figured I was just going to damage the cardstock. Now I'm going to use the Poinsettia Blooms die set for this one to create the floral element, and I'm cutting it right out of the center of my gold mat for my card. As long as you can get that die in the center and it's smaller than the mat that's going on before it or the piece that's going on before it, totally works. This red cardstock here is Poppy Field, and it is my mat for my card. And once again, I'm cutting that Poinsettia Bloom die right out of the center of it. My foil piece is going to completely cover this, so I can just cut out of the center. Again, no one's going to know. other than anyone that watches this video. So after that first cut, I looked at the back side of it and I could tell that the center of that poinsettia hadn't really cut quite through yet. So I put it back in the machine and ran it through back and forth a couple times just to make sure that it was completely cut out. This die set comes with a shadow die, and I'm doing this in vellum. You don't necessarily need to use the shadow die, but then you would be gluing this right onto your card, and you have very little wiggle room. By using the shadow here, I can assemble everything onto this vellum, and I can move it around and see exactly how I want it on my card front, and then make the plunge or make the decision exactly where I want it and glue it in place. So it gives you a little bit more freedom, a little bit more wiggle room. So I'm going to take the gold die cut piece and I'm going to glue this straight down to my vellum. I've taken all of the poinsettia pieces out of here. We're going to use the second die cut with the red cardstock, and we're going to fill in those pieces there. It even looks beautiful just like this on its own, but you would see the mats behind there, and this piece is a little bit too big. It's going to go off of the card, so we don't want to do that. So for my image piece, I'm leaving it into the piece that I die cut it from. It's going to be easier to ink blend here. I have a detailed ink blending brush, and I'm using some Lumberjack Plaid Distress ink. I'm using the detailed blending brush and only brushing this ink from the inside part of the petal out. So I'm not completely ink blending my entire petal. I'm just giving it a little bit of shadow. And you can see that it looks a lot more than it is on this piece of cardstock. Once I pop it in, it's not going to be as, it's not going to look like as much. It's going to be a little bit more subtle. If by chance you have any piece that pops out, that's totally fine. Don't worry about it. But it is much easier to ink blend while these pieces are still in the cardstock here. You could use the Altenew sticky mat to put this on to do your ink blending, but you can see how I like to move my cardstock around. So it'd be a lot harder to do that while it's on the sticky mat. I like to move it around so that when I'm working with my brush in my right hand, I have the darkest part towards the left and I'm brushing it towards the right. This is the way that it works best for me. The other reason I like to leave my pieces in the die cut is I can put my pieces side by side and then put some glue in the openings for the pieces that I want to put in, and then I can really easily find the pieces that I need, pop them in those openings. It's like putting a puzzle together where you know exactly where all the pieces go. You can see how quickly this happens. So for my second half of my poinsettia here, I flip it around. I also flip my red piece around. Again, there's very little guesswork to where these petals go. Now, all these petals are different shapes, so it wouldn't take a whole lot of time to figure out where they'd go, but this just makes it way easier. By having it in there, I can pop it out of the one place, immediately know exactly where it goes in the second piece, and pop it right in there. Now, I'm using liquid glue on here like I'm using with everything else, and vellum doesn't like liquid. However, because I'm putting those pieces on there and I'm putting my acrylic block right on there and that glue dries fairly quickly, it doesn't start to buckle that vellum, so that's not an issue. Now that I have that poinsettia ready to go, I can start assembling the base of my card. So I'm going to glue down my gold mat. This card's going to be horizontal because it works best with that sentiment. So I'm gluing that down, then I'm going to glue down my red piece. Now all of those extra bits from the die cut there, I just left them in that red piece. I'm going to glue them down. If it was a die or a piece that I thought I could use on a future card, I might pull them out. But because this is red and I thought it looked kind of weird that the greenery would be red, I didn't think I'd ever be using it. So might as well just leave it in there and just glue that right down. Then I can glue my sentiment down, and while my acrylic block is on there, while that's drying, I can figure out exactly how I want to place this poinsettia. So once I have it figured out, I put my glue on the back here, and I am trying to make sure not to put any glue where that vellum is visible. I'm putting it only on the back of the greenery and poinsettia die cut pieces so that I'm not seeing glue. Put my acrylic block on there, let that dry, and then I can take my scissors and trim that off. Now you could leave it as it is, but because I have that one piece that's fairly large, I figured I might as well use it. So I'm going to glue that to the other side of the card. Now typically when I do something like this, I like to do it in 3 different places, but for this card, I'm only doing it in 2 because that other piece is just too small. And I didn't want to, I liked this piece on the right side as it is. I didn't want to cut that down further, so I only have 2 pieces, and to me it looks just fine. I just typically prefer there be 3 different spots. So now that my poinsettia on the right side there is drying, I'm just going to add a little bit of glossy accents to the center of that poinsettia. Again, this is not necessary. It's just going to add a little bit more dimension, and I just like the look of it. Now, the last one here, the Believe, this is where I changed my mind. While I was working on all the other cards, I thought, you know what, the idea that I had for this one, I think it would look really good on some blue cardstock. So I did my foiling again. This is Cosmic Sky cardstock from Spellbinders. That Poppy Fields from the last card was also from Spellbinders. So I did my matte gold foiling on the Cosmic Sky cardstock. Then I'm taking the Uncharted Mariner Distress ink. This is the same ink that I used on that very first card, and I'm just darkening the top part of the sky. I have some die cuts here that I die cut off screen. They are from Simon Snow Globe die set. So this is a Santa or a sleigh and reindeer that goes in the sky, as well as some houses and trees. Or rather, a house and trees. I was going to do multiples and then changed my mind and decided to just do a singular house. So that cardstock there was the pearl gold cardstock. And then I have my Believe foiled piece that I'm going to glue right on there. I'm also using the mirrored gold cardstock as well as the glitter gold cardstock. My Santa and Sleigh are die cut in black, and then the rest of the pieces are die cut in the different golds, aside from these window shutters. I thought they would look good in black as well. Now on screen, the Santa and Sleigh really kind of blend into the background. In real life, it shows up a little bit more. It is still black on a fairly dark background, but it does show up a lot more in real life than it does on the video. So before I start gluing down my houses, my house and my trees, I wanted to just place them where I thought I was going to put them, just to make sure that I liked how they were going to look. So these dies are all from that same die set there. There's a couple different trees to choose from. And rather than having all one gold metallic finish, I thought it would look nice in a few different ones. So I used the mirror gold as well as the glitter gold for that. The glitter gold for the rooftop and chimney, and then just the pearl gold for the house. And you could see when I put my mat down behind my blue piece that the house was cut out of that. There was a lot of room left, so if there was anything else that you needed to die cut in that pearl gold, you could have die cut that for that then and then used it for a different project. Again, you're not going to see this. No one's going to know that anything was die cut out of it, but it's a good way to extend your cardstock. For this particular one, I like to use my tweezers for gluing down these pieces because some of them are fairly small. So by using them to hold that down while I put the glue on and then transfer it to my other hand, these are reverse tweezers, so you have to squeeze them to open them up. So it makes it really easy to transfer die cuts from one hand to the other without worrying about dropping them. And I tend to be a little bit of a klutz, so I would tend to drop it if it was ones that you had to hold closed. So I use these quite a bit, especially for some smaller intricate die cuts. Now, even though I said that Santa and Sleigh does show up a lot more in real life, I like to add some gold accents to it just to tie it in with the rest of the gold. So I'm using a gold gel pen as well as a Stardust gel pen. The Stardust is kind of a shimmery glittery, but it's got a gold tone to it. So I used the gold on the reins, and then I used it on the sleigh bottom and used the Stardust one on some of the reindeer antlers as well as the top of the sleigh. Last little detail that I always love to do when I'm using a Santa and Sleigh is just a touch of stickles on that very first reindeer, giving him a little red nose, and then I'm going to set that aside to dry. These copper foil sentiments are absolutely stunning and perfect for creating some elegant cards. And remember what I said at the beginning of the video is you don't need to get quite this complicated with it. You could keep them much more simple, but I did want to share some ways to take those sentiments and step them up a little bit more if you wanted to do just a little bit more than just some simple foiling. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I really appreciate the time you spend here, and I hope you have a fantastic day.